do people fall for the manipulation?
Oh, well,
So,
that's a great question. So I'm going to hit record and we should be live on YouTube, live with Carob Marcelle. And I have just learned that the title of this chat is going to be discussing whiteness. So I can't wait to see what you have in mind. Do you want to take it away?
yeah, sure. Leslie, thanks so much for letting me ask you these questions. It's always interesting because people will come up to me and just very boldly say, well, I have no idea what it is to be Black. And it's an invasive question, honestly. And I always correct them. Well, neither do I because I'm biracial. But I have lived amongst fully African American people. Um, and I have just really been shocked at how people see us as so extremely different.
Mm.
So I wanted to start having these conversations, and I especially wanted to have them now as we're moving into fall or as we're moving into winter because um, people suffer with a lot of depression. And I think that the DEI trainings, the DEI dogma has caused a lot of people to really suffer. So my hope is that in having honest conversations and digging into what people have experienced, we can see the humanity more so in each other.
Mm.
So,
So this sounds like the social justice framework of, um, I don't know what it's like to be XYZ, and
yeah,
I've got to do the work or
right.
whatever. Don't, but they have this catch 22 or this sort of like impossible paradox of you can't ask somebody else to do the emotional labor, but you also can't assume, and so.
Right. And so the first thing that I wanted to ask was, I just
Mhm.
want to start from the very beginning. Um, for me, I can remember basically the first time I started thinking about race. Um, and I never hated someone because of their race because I have a white mother. So that never made sense to me. And when I would hear people say really terrible slurs against white people, it didn't make sense to me. I saw that as racist.
Mhm.
Now, today we're told that you can't be racist unless you're white.
Mhm.
It just doesn't relate. So, how about you? When you were growing up, when was the first time that you remember seeing color?
I guess the first time I remember being aware of race that I remember would have been right maybe the first day I walked home from kindergarten. In school, I was one of the only white kids in my majority Hispanic area, probably a similar number of white kids and black kids in my school. Um, and I was being called honky and then some other words that I didn't understand. And I was walking and there were a group of boys walking behind me and I became aware that they were making fun of me as I was walking. And I remember stopping at a ditch and climbing down into the ditch and waiting for them to pass. And it wasn't like I was being threatened. I just was uncomfortable. I just didn't understand when I became aware that they were making fun of me, it was just really disconcerting and strange to me. So I waited for them to pass and then I kept walking.
Did you have any resentment towards them?
No, not right away. No. I just didn't it was weird to me. I don't even think I understood that day that that was what it was about. It was
Yeah.
just the beginning. It's like the first time I remember race coming up.
And in your childhood years, did you have friends who were Hispanic in your
Hmm.
town?
Yeah, yeah. Most of my friends were Hispanic. Yeah.
And was it an issue for them? Did they like, I don't know, did they point out and make you feel like you were different?
My friends know, but uh sometimes like my um it was an issue in school. It was an issue socially. Being the white girl, you always knew you were different. I was unpopular. I kind of pick last for sports when they let the kids pick. There was me and this boy who was also white, who had really thick glasses, and we would be the last two, and I'd be like, why am I with him? I can, I can actually, and it's not his glasses, because lots of people have really thick glasses, but
I was like,
I'm drawing a caricature. He was kind of a caricature. I mean, he was like, poor guy, I hope he's really happy and successful now, but he was a
he was a nerd.
he was a goofy little kid who had a reputation for wetting his pants, and had
Oh,
glasses that were super thick, and just had, like, he socially had some stuff. Now I've really put my foot in it with picking on his glasses too much. I wear glasses too, but so
no.
yeah, there was a social cost to being different racially. So yeah.
What about teachers? Were they okay with that? Did they just did it seem like they thought it was normal, or did they work to create unity in the classroom?
There let me think about that. I don't think it was ever really addressed. I don't think it was addressed directly.
Yeah,
Race. Mm-mm.
I've been really surprised about that because I watched in my son's class last year, and he was in middle school.
Mhm.
Um, and I watched these people only vote. They were Hispanic kids, and they were only voting for Mexico for the country project. And I said,
Mm.
don't you think that maybe if you divided them up, and the teacher said it's perfectly fine for them to be tribal.
Mm. Okay.
Do you think that it's good or healthy for people to be tribal? Or are we just inherently tribal?
I guess tribal in what sense? Are we talking about true tribalism, or are we talking about the formation of cliques and in groups? Because I think that there's no getting away from that.
Okay.
People are going to find people that they connect better with and form close bonds with those people, and there are going to be some that don't fit. um Tribalism based on,
Maybe on multiculturalism or on
like, by
even in the same
race.
culture. Yeah.
I think to some extent it's going to be somewhat unavoidable, just because culture and tradition and background understanding of what it means to be in, certain family or ethnic or different groups is really important. But it I think that it doesn't I guess it depends on to what you're doing with that tribalism. If it's just for the sake of familial bonds and friendship, that's one thing. But when it becomes an in-group, out-group sort of hostile situation, it can get really kind of toxic for a society.
So you just said that culturally we stay together because we're similar. So what ideas, what preconceived notions have you had about other people's cultures?
Um, I guess so. What do you mean? Maybe could you be a little more specific?
Sure. So you've interviewed my friend Julie Bailey, and Julie uses the phrase they marry a truth to a lie. So in terms of kind of the cultural conversation, there are certain stereotypes, I guess you would say, that people have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm just wondering what stereotypes you've believed about people of different cultures and why.
Mm. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I can put a fine point on it like that. I've I grew up knowing people who were from different cultural backgrounds from an early age, and I don't think I've ever seen any particular group as monolithic in that way. So
Yeah.
stereotypes can be helpful because they describe averages, but they fall apart at the individual level. And um for instance, growing up with a place where most of my peers were Mexican American, that meant that most of the people who picked on me were Mexican American, but also most of my best friends that I played with were Mexican American. So it wasn't like you start to have a sense of the culture as something that's um monolithic. Although when you asked me first about cultural stereotypes, I have to tell you I brought this book out, Counseling
Okay.
the Culturally Diverse.
Yeah.
This was a place where, as an adult, I encountered somebody actually putting together chapter after chapter of cultural stereotypes about different racial groups and serving it up as if it were diversity education. I was really shocked by this because even as a little kid, I didn't think this way about people.
And what is that way?
That people can be described so flatly based on racial background or cultural background.
So a lot of people will they assume that I was doing an interview with someone a couple of weeks ago, and the
Mm-hmm.
person said, "Well, when I talk to a black person, he wasn't trying to be aggressive or anything. He's just being honest." He said, "When I see black people, when I encounter black people, I think of a spider crawling on the wall."
Oh, wow.
And I just said, "Okay." And he said, it's in that kind of back of your head, and you're thinking, I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder, what their agenda is or whatever. Um, and it makes you uncomfortable, but you just like sit with it.
That's interesting.
Have you ever felt that way? Like,
About race? No, I've never felt that way about race. I have felt that way most of my. I also grew up in a socioeconomically depressed area, poor area, and I have seen that in terms of if I see, say, groups of young people who are um, boys. I can remember just a group of boys or even girls. Gosh, the girls can be really scrappy too in these poor areas. I'll cross the street, but
yeah,
it's not based on color. It's based on what does that group look like? What are they doing? What are they walking around swearing? Are they walking around yelling at people? Because that's the thing that you find people, just a group of teenage boys walking along, kind of cussing and looking for trouble, looking to stir things up.
yes.
And that's the kind of thing I'll walk away from. So, but that's more and I'm not picking on poor people, but it's a there anybody could be in that group of people. Anybody could be in that
Well, I
crowd.
wanted to have the discussion with you because I feel like you're extremely authentic, and I wanted to just like not hide anything because they're really
Mm-hmm.
hard conversations to have. I think that a lot of people, um, well, a lot of people shy away from the idea from even having it because I think it's important that people understand that I'm not trying to attack. I'm only trying to learn
Mm-hmm.
because I'm wondering, my ultimate thing here is what in the world would make people fall for the anti-racist agenda?
I think that when I was in graduate school and I was sitting there looking around at people who were parroting this stuff and actually talking about their white privilege, or the few people who were of color in that class were silent, pretty much. I don't know what thoughts were going on in their minds. I don't know if they were really uncomfortable with this or if they were in agreement with it. I have no idea, but I heard many people, or a number of people, would just parrot this stuff, say these lines really easily. And I thought, do you really believe this? Does this ring true for you? And what I came to understand or believe is that for a lot of people, it sounds believable to them because they've grown up in, I think, the middle oh and
Upper
upper
middle
middle
class.
class is primarily white, and it's easy to have an us versus them and associate some of those behaviors that are common among people in the depressed classes with race.
Why do we believe it's primarily white, though?
Why is the upper and the
Why
middle and
why do
upper
we
middle?
believe that? The reason that I'm wondering that is because it's been very, very seldom that I've ever seen a Japanese or a Chinese person who was very
Mm,
poor. I've known many Hispanic people who are very, very comfortable.
Hmm.
Um, African Americans, yes, living in the intercity, that's what I've seen. But if I lived in Georgia, I would feel very differently
Hmm.
about the experience. Or even Washington, D.C. We were
Hmm.
just there last summer and there were so many people, and I'm looking at their hair going, that cost you like $500. Like, that's
Hmm.
the way that I see things. Um, but why do you think it is that we believe a certain narrative?
Hmm. That's a good question. So I guess without the demographics on hand, I would say that my understanding is that it's still a majority Caucasian country, that there's majority white, and that white people make up a larger proportion of the wealthier groups, people who have, um, I guess, middle to upper middle class income than other ethnic backgrounds, and that there's a concentration. This is
Hmm.
off the top of my head. My understanding of the demographics is that you get a more of a concentration of people with darker skin tones as you go down the economic ladder, and the Asian, like you say, there are like international districts like Seattle.
Right?
There are places where you'll find people who are not as well off who are Asian, but there are a lot of Asian people in the upper and middle classes as well. But why do we tend to associate that with white? I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. It seems observable. It's like anecdotal. Like it has been my observation. Like when I moved to Seattle, um, most people were white here in Seattle. I moved, and I thought it was interesting to see that. We lived in Southwest Seattle, where there's an international school my kids went to, and there was a lot of diversity. I guess there were people from all backgrounds. Saw a lot of women wearing hijab and burqas, and people from
Like
all different
Delridge
ethnic
area?
groups.
Were
Hmm?
you in were you like in
Delridge, yeah. Well,
Delridge?
south of that, like go towards White Center.
Okay, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I didn't really answer your question very well. I'm trying to think about it.
No, me too.
And
I feel like it's an intentional narrative.
well, and I want to come
Um,
back to something you asked me earlier about, did I ever associate negative things with particular groups? And when I was in middle school and high school, I had learned that being white was really uncool. I had learned that by then, that it was not okay, and that it was uh, a thing to be ashamed of, and that you'd be um, that I wanted to be anything but. And I think that that I'm sure that that was associated with complicated thoughts about being intimidated by other people and groups that I just would know would reject me. So there was that. There was a racial dynamic there.
were there any lessons that also fed into that or no?
Lessons that I learned or
Like
lessons
in
that I was
school?
taught from
Yeah.
school. Um, not I don't remember it ever being addressed by teachers. I don't remember that.
Do you remember any teachers having quote unquote implicit bias towards you?
Um, you know, I had other problems in school too. I was this really spacey kid. I did really well on my um standardized testing. I always got uh these high scores, and so they put me in the gifted programs, but I struggled with attention issues, and so I'd never get my work done. And so my my childhood was, this is totally separate from race. It's my own issue. I was in and out of administrative meetings for my from early elementary school till I dropped out of all my gifted stuff when I was in mid high school, because I was just sick of it. But I was in and out of administrative meetings constantly where they were talking about, why doesn't your output meet your potential? And I think that now we would have just diagnosed ADHD and given the kid some drugs, which
Right.
I'm not really in favor of, but that is what would have happened now with a kid like that. But back then it was just like they're just scratching their heads and then putting me on another disciplinary track because I'm not doing my work when I can do my work. So the teachers, I think my experience of teachers was that they were pretty hostile and pretty in I didn't have a good experience in school at all. It was, and but I couldn't say that it was because I was white. I couldn't say that. I don't know.
When that all started.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd hate to ascribe it to that because it would just be conjecture. I think I might have been a kid that it was easy to be annoyed with without whether I was white or not.
I laugh because you've met my son.
Yeah, it's a
And
sweet guy.
it's the exact same story.
Yeah.
Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yeah. Let me all participants. All right. You should be able to now.
Okay, hopefully this will work. You can still, yeah, you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we doing this? Sorry about that. Can I click? Sorry. Sorry, I had it already up here. Now it doesn't show. Okay. Not this one. This is the first one.
Did you minimize that other one?
Oh yeah. That'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Sorry. Thanks. Okay. Sorry about this, guys. Enter your full screen. I don't know if you saw any of these, but when I first saw was right after George Floyd.
Mm.
Um, and it's just questions that you're supposed to ask with your child.
Oh my gosh. Wait,
Uh-huh.
what? What
Uh-huh.
age group?
Children's
Mm.
just
Oh,
with your
that's a
family.
kid that
So
looks like she's
she looks like
a
at least middle
teenager.
school, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So
13, 14.
yeah. But then as a white person, I have privilege of learning history about my race in school. I regularly see my race's point of view in textbooks.
Hmm.
Why are we assuming that I don't?
Hmm.
Um, I've often seen my race speaking as a voice of authority or a voice in power, but I've seen the opposite of this. I've seen I've seen senators
Mm-hmm.
quiet down and not say anything because they are white and they have been put in their place. Um, of having grandparents or older generations who are not denied a high school or higher education due to their skin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure, not to their skin, but economically, people have still been denied things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are people who've worked in coal mines and a college education was not an opportunity for them. So I'm wondering why it is that people would be okay with teaching this. This one's just first for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they, what would make
Why would they
okay with
be
this?
okay with that?
Yeah.
And what I what I've come to think is that some people read this and they think, "Oh my gosh, you're right. You're right. I have been blind to these things. Oh wow, I see I think that there are well-intentioned people who see themselves in this. I think it's seeing my race speaking as a voice of authority or a voice of power. Someone might see that and what I think is, well, there's wealthy, powerful people, and my looking more like them in some ways. Does that afford me anything? Does that necessarily? I don't think so. I mean, it might if they're disproportionately balancing laws in order to benefit people who look like me, which some people would argue that they are. But do I necessarily benefit from that? If I'm in a country, let's say we have an ethno state where everybody is the same background, the rich people are still making the rules to benefit the people who are in the landed classes. And there are people who are going to fall to the bottom who aren't necessarily benefited because they look like the people who are in power.
Right.
But for the people who are in the upper echelons, the more moneyed classes, they might not see that distinction so well. And so when they read this, they're not thinking in terms of class, and they hear the call for racial division, and it rings true to them. And if they feel guilty about that, then these steps might make sense to them.
So I'm looking at this one that says of not being followed in a store unnecessarily. And that's true. I don't know if you've ever been followed in a store, but I've definitely been followed
Oh
in.
yeah, being a poor kid in a poor neighborhood. Well, and rightly so, because we were sticking candies in our pockets.
Oh, okay.
Not me, not all the time, but every store as a kid, you were definitely followed.
You were followed. Okay.
Definitely followed, whether you were doing anything wrong or not.
See, and I was so squeaky clean and I would be followed, and it definitely felt like I was being followed
Mm-hmm.
due to race
Mm-hmm.
because it was just like I would never, yeah. And I had this need to separate myself from the thug life.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I have my own internal bias because of, but I don't really think there's something wrong with having internalized bias. Like,
Mm-hmm.
one, sometimes it's common sense. And another thing is that it it protects you sometimes. But if you have it, then I think it's up to you to work on it. So,
Wait, say that again.
okay. So if you have an internalized bias, right?
Okay.
If you have internalized some bigotry,
Mm-hmm.
then it's up to you to personally learn for yourself, not to become a Marxist.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. Like you could
No, I definitely can see your point, and I could see how a kid, how you can stereotype people based on looks, and I can imagine that happening to a kid in a store. Like this, just making a snap judgment and making assumptions about somebody, and I could see race being a part of that. I can definitely see how that could happen.
And if it is, how do you feel like you work on that? If, I mean, and you're not a person who has those kind of feelings, but if you could put yourself in
Well,
those shoes.
I guess I think when I first started seeing these kind of conversations popping up, I thought that there's an extent to which they do make some sense, because it's bringing something up and saying, hey, it's like perspective taking. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Have you had this experience? Some people have this experience. Be more sensitive to the experiences that other people may have. And if we're using these kind of conversations in order to stress the value of individuality and the fact that you can't know something about somebody by looking at them, then these kind of conversations are really valuable. Like
Yeah.
what you just described, I'm squeaky clean. I'm trying really hard to distance myself from what you called thug life. And yet I feel like people are still following me around because they see a black kid and they are suspicious of me. Well, if you say that to somebody who's never had an experience like that, or who doesn't know what that's like, then they can have an aha moment and go, wow, that must have really made you feel awful to be suspected even when you were a good kid, and to not be able to shake that experience of people giving you the skeptical look, or being suspicious of you. And but that's to further the value of individuality.
Right. I'm going to pull up this one
Okay.
because this is the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we drop, in my opinion, we drop reason from the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So what people of color want from white allies, respect us. What I never see on the opposite side is, and will respect you in return.
Um,
Listen to us, trust us. Um, those and honesty. Yeah, that's the big one. See this one down
mm,
here and down here, honesty.
okay.
do you feel that if you were in a room with take take some of the people from the Evergreen story, and
Mm.
you're in a room with some very aggressive people, do they really want honesty from you? Do they really want your honest opinion, or even what you experienced at Antioch?
No, no, they want to hear what they think already come out of your mouth. They want to hear you say the things that that they believe, and that's what'll pass as honesty. They don't want your own opinions.
So from growing up to now, do you feel like race relations have improved overall?
I would I would say no. I would say that I think that all this focus on race and the way that it's been done, it's been an enormous missed opportunity to get people to have more empathy towards one another. And the way that this has been instituted has instead driven people apart and made people um, more cautious and more aware of race in a really negative and destructive way.
Do you think it's made it to the point where people don't want to socialize with people outside of their groups? Or do you think that it's heading in that direction?
Well, I don't know if I could say for for everyone, but I would say that it I think for some people it is making them less likely to try to connect across ethnic background because of the because you're by talking about this constantly and the way that we're talking about this, the division of good and bad, basically white being bad and not white being good. What we've done is made people who are looking with when they see a person of another background, they're wondering how much of this that person thinks. You
Right.
know, how much are you like? I can imagine that whether you're a white person or a person of a different ethnic background, when you meet someone who is not of your same ethnic background, you're wondering, do they think I think this? Do they think this? I mean,
Yeah.
this is just so pervasive right now in the cultural conversation that it's adding another layer of complexity to race relations.
Do you feel a need to, when you walk in a room, very clearly define who you are before you can even have a conversation?
No, I don't think so. That's an
I
interesting
do.
question.
I
You do?
do. I
Yeah.
do. I
Will
absolutely,
you
if
give
I'm,
more context for that? Will you say more
yeah.
about that?
So if I'm talking to a senator or talking to somebody who I need to make it very clear,
Mm,
where I stand, I
hmm.
have found myself, and it's only happened twice, but twice is too many times. Twice isn't, it's enough to like, become very cautious of it,
Hmm.
where I absolutely will say, oh yeah, I'm one of the people who doesn't hate you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's exhausting. And,
Yeah.
but I also wonder if I feel this need to put people at ease.
Mm,
Um, and that's not the same as to be like a token, right? Because, well,
mm,
I mean, it's not, I will never say what somebody else wants me to say, but I do feel like there's so much tension. People absolutely assume X, even if it's not true.
mm,
And I'm wondering if the reason that we're allowed and how long we can go along with listening or being put in our place without without reacting, where we will start to hate each other.
mhm, mhm.
Do you feel like that hate is starting to, or resentment is boiling up?
I see it online, but then online is a weird place. So I don't know how well that translates to in person life at large. But I see uh I see a lot of angry white people online at this point. I think that the finger pointing and the accusation is it's exactly what I was. This is the one of the early thoughts I had as this started to come out. This is a terrible thing. You're going to create a backlash.
Yes.
And I I don't see how this serves anybody very well at all. And I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to see that in the online comments that I get in videos sometimes, but especially I don't know if you've seen there, if you're on Twitter, for a while there it seemed like my feed was full of videos of Black kids beating somebody up
Yeah.
who is not Black, like beating up an Asian person or beating up a
Yes.
white person. And I feel like that, with, it's who knows how that's done. Is that really representative of who's out there beating people up? If so, there's a conversation that needs to be had around that, maybe. But also, is it being curated in order to fuel a kind of rage, in order to fuel a kind of narrative? And I don't know, but it does seem to be having that effect when you see the comments and the captions on those things.
Yeah, I'm really shocked. I've been really shocked to watch what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just the fact that young people are okay with what's happening, are cheering for what's happening on either side, or the fact that there's so much hate. And I saw a video where they were asked what they learned in school. And this side was, if I see these people, I will stab them and run them over with a car.
Mm,
And this side was, these people are made to be our slaves.
mm, ugh,
And that's normalized. But in the black white conversation,
mhm.
what what's going to go through a person's head when you see people dancing on cars, twerking in the streets, stealing? At some point, I'm wondering if the goal is to make African Americans seem disposable.
Hmm.
That seems the same thing with DEI trainings. DEI trainings don't tend to be these loving conversations where you're just trying to learn and listen to other people. They seem to be um, either you will turn and you will believe what we believe, or we will squash you. And doesn't that build more hate than it does anything else?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I so I'm wondering what the solution is. And the reason I asked about school was because there's so many stories that we do not hear that are hidden from us, and that's on
Mm,
purpose. We don't hear that African Americans have been wealthy for multiple decades,
mm,
that some slaves married their mistresses. I mean, they married their owners' wives when they died, and then they own slaves themselves. And um, or we
mm,
don't hear about inventors. There's so many things that we don't learn, and we only hear this narrative that seems to be putting people into a box. And
mhm,
this box seeds resentment in them.
mhm,
Well, we've never been able to accomplish, even though that's not true. And it seeds resentment and pity on the other side.
mhm.
I don't know. That's so I don't really think that I don't know. I don't really think I understand the the concept of whiteness, except that there is much power in telling people a lie on both sides.
Mm.
Does that seem?
Yeah, well, the concept of whiteness, it seems like it's a similar tactic that's been used for a long time to divide people. I remember something that really struck me when I was reading, I guess it was in college, a college history class, and we were studying the antebellum period before the Civil War, and reading about how the wealthy landowners in the South pitted the poor blacks and the poor whites against each other. And the even though their living standards were similar, uh, the blacks and the whites, and that they were working to politically manipulate, they used the association of the they used the association of the poor whites with the wealthy whites via race in order to make them dehumanize the blacks and to make the blacks resent the whites as being associated with those wealthier people. And so it was this divide and conquer strategy that kept the populace from rising up against the people that were actually oppressing them. And it seems like it's an easy way to manipulate people because you're using obvious cues. You're pointing to something that, everybody can see.
Yeah. And even within the Black community in that time, if you lived in the house versus if you lived in the field, you were taught to be against each other.
Mm.
So it just makes no sense to me that people would fall for it because there's so many examples throughout history of you are being divided. You are being divided intentionally. And I just don't understand how we can how we can call ourselves progressive and be so regressive. I don't know. Do you have some
Yeah.
comments?
Yeah. Going to the chat. I'm reading the chat a little bit. Let's see. Michael Olin says, likely been worsened in terms of race relations by making others objects of fear or reprisal and accusations of racism, bigotry, and shame. Consider those with social anxiety and their concerns. Pierce Taylor says, I look like a candy thief. Well, not anymore, but I guess I did steal some penny candies when I was a kid. Actually, they were 10-cent candies. I'm not old enough to have penny candies. But Blake Anderson says, how about we just follow Martin Luther King and treat people as individuals? Racial blindness. I don't think identity/race allows for its own unique epistemology. Thanks. Yeah, I was really surprised that was one of the topics that surprised me so much was their rejection of the concept of colorblindness. That's such
Yes.
an offensive thing now to these social justice people. It is so offensive
Well,
because it means you're ignoring the struggles of other people is what it means. It's like you're telling them, no, your background doesn't count. It doesn't matter.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, I understand people saying that when people say, I don't see color. Yes, we
Mm-hmm.
do, but
Yeah.
it adds to the painting. It's not, it doesn't, it shouldn't mean one thing or another about a human being.
Well, and it's silly to say that it's meant literally.
Right.
I don't think that concept has ever been meant literally. I
But we're
don't
not talking
see
about deep
color.
thinkers.
Yeah, yeah, you're
We're,
right.
we're, we're not talking about deep thinkers, and we're talking about people who have been taught since the cradle to hate other people. And that generally, in my experience, generally comes more, that's something taught more in minority households than in white households,
To
which
hate.
is to date. Yeah. So to resent the white
Mm,
person. Like
mm-hmm.
it's funny because some people will say, I think Chris Rock did something and he said the one thing that all minorities can that they can agree on or, be relieved about is that they're not the black one. But in minority households, all of the hate is pointed, well, not all of the hate, because there is hate between each group as well. But it's very easy to say the white man keeps us down. And
That's
yeah,
it's interesting that you say that and that this is because I will say growing up, I mean, my parents were really liberal in terms of this kind of stuff. Like it was absolutely like drilled into us to see people as equals. And, that was not there was no room for any racist kind of commentary in my childhood. There was never, it was,
yeah,
it, they were very much of that liberal progressive mindset, I guess. And my understanding from even from early about why I was treated differently by the other kids was I had to have a sort of humility because these people don't like white people because white people have hurt these people. It's that's sort of like under how did I even come to understand that? I don't remember if it was sort of just absorbed culturally or if anybody said that explicitly, but there was just sort of an understanding that it's natural for these kids to not like you because they've learned that white people have hurt their families, and so their resentment of you is a part of something larger.
So
Does
that
that make
becomes,
sense?
yeah, well, that goes back to the first paper that I pulled up with
Mm-hmm.
talking to your kids. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of conversation that you would have with your kid. The place that I don't understand it is especially over where you were. If we're talking Mexico, we might be talking maybe first generation. So
Mm-hmm.
so who hurt them? Because I'm thinking where they came from was really, really bad, and people who looked just like them likely were the harm and the danger to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still conversations. There's still, I mean, even in my small town, there's a large Hispanic population. And I was outside working at a job once, and somebody walked by me and they said to another person, "Don't stay out in the sun or you're gonna get as dark as her."
Ooh.
But it's perfectly fine. That's just a cultural conversation. There's no stigma that I think
Mm-hmm.
tends to be in a Caucasian household
Mm-hmm.
more of a we don't do this because
Mm-hmm.
this is racist and we don't want to be affiliated with the KKK, which no one should.
Mm-hmm.
But that conversation is not always had. In fact, I'd say it's more often not had in minority households.
Mm-hmm.
So you take it for granted that it's okay to walk over people. And I think that's why so many are willing to accept this. But when you talk to a person, especially if you talk to like a person of faith who happens to be of color, they're appalled by it being taught without realizing that within the community it's taught anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
That's
Anyways,
interesting. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. So these questions that you asked me, when you think about your answers to these questions about formative race concepts, how would you respond?
okay, can you ask me them again? I dropped my phone, which has all of my notes on it.
Yeah, sure. Let me pull it up. You sent me this yesterday. Okay, well, here's one. I don't think that you asked specifically, but what injustices do you feel are true towards minorities? I guess you meant like what are we hearing about? What do you think is really where's the truth in this idea?
Exactly. So one example would be, did slavery happen and was it atrocious? Of course it
Mhm.
was. Was there kind of a nuance to it? Were there Black slave owners? Yes. Were there people who, to blow up everything like Florida taught? Were there slaves that learned skills that eventually brought their families into prosperity? Yes, there was. We can't have those conversations because they don't fit the narrative. We can't have conversations about what's good about ethnic studies and what's bad about ethnic studies because it doesn't fit the narrative. So, is there truth? Yes. But one of the truths, I love what Dr. Bob Woodson said, and that is that when whites were at their worst, blacks were often at their best. But we
Hmm.
don't want to have that conversation that when obstacles come in the human experience, that we can overcome them. And I believe that should be a human conversation, not a conversation based on your race.
I love how strength based you are. You even when you start to like talk about something that's a negative, you just like instinctively spin it towards the positive and towards something that you can build on.
Well, I think that's the healthy way to live your life, right? I mean, we are breaking people, we are dividing people, we are crushing them, and you have to wonder why. And
Mhm.
I don't know, that's the reason. I did want to answer that one person who said, think about those with anxiety. That's
Mhm.
exactly why I'm trying to do this. I want people to understand that having your doubts, having your questions, whatever else, it's perfectly fine. Even having biases is fine. I had a person who reached out to me and he was very, very upset because his child is now pregnant with a black man's baby. And he said something that he wished he hadn't said.
Mm.
And it was shocking when I heard it.
Mm.
But again, hearing that just made me go, okay, so you've got some stuff, you've got some work to do on yourself, but you don't turn that into the guilt that pushes for Marxism for the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think. I think everyone has some sort of biases,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Well, let me ask you another one.
yeah.
Are there stereotypes you believe about minorities?
Well, I guess the question is can
That's not how
stereo
you asked it to
okay,
me. So yeah.
stereotypes be good? So if
Yeah.
stereotypes can be good, you know, I tend to believe that um Asian families have a really, really strong, well, and Hispanic, but in different ways. Asian families have a strong focus on academics and that pushes their kids to success. Hispanic people have strong work ethic overall. Um, and I believe that African Americans, not overall, but a large portion, are still mental slaves.
Mm. Wow. That's a strong statement.
I know I'm going to get myself in so much trouble, but yeah, that's
That's a
something I
strong, not a,
believe.
well, I wouldn't have said that because I don't know that I think that. I don't think that. I'm curious about why you think that, but can you
Um,
imagine if I had been the one to say that? So there's something,
okay,
but I
yeah.
don't, well, why do you think that? Why do you think African Americans are mental slaves? I don't think that that
Uh-huh.
doesn't ring true for me,
Okay.
for the people that I know who are African American. I wouldn't say that. So how do you get that idea?
Um, I think that when you vote for things that have never served you well because you're told to, that to me looks like mental slavery. I think that when you look backwards instead of forwards, when you believe
Mm,
terrible things about yourself, like you aren't capable of testing well, you aren't capable
mm,
of achieving, everything is in your way and you just don't have the strength to get past it. To me, that is slavery. That is an inability to, you believe that you cannot do for yourself. And that is a narrative that you've been taught, in my opinion, by slave masters, some of
mm,
them being Black professionals who are well off and have never suffered. Like they've never been in the financial place, but they tell you like in a bad financial place, right? So
mm,
so the children of doctors and lawyers and whatever else, but they go into the communities and they tell the poorest people the reason you can't achieve is because you're Black,
mm,
and they believe it. And so that's what I consider mental slavery, is
mm.
just not being able to say, I'm being lied to and I'm not going to fall for that anymore.
Well, there's something so seductive about this narrative for people who are. You asked about why would people like why would white people read this stuff and say I agree with this and I'm going to go along with this, and I think that's a big question. I think that there are probably sociologists and people who've studied this who could do a better job of dissecting that than I could, but it is interesting when you are describing your perception of white households raising kids to in and this is true in the household I grew up in, but I don't know how true it is across the
Right.
board. I don't know, but it sounds like it's your anecdotal perception or through the people you've talked with that it is your perception as well, that there's an attempt to raise non-racially biased kids, and you don't see that same attempt being done in houses with people of color. So there's a background difference in how primed you are to accept certain things. So if you're already primed to feel somewhat guilty about being white, then you're going to hear these kind of narratives and you're going to feel that guilt. You're not going to be thinking about the weight of class, how class bears out in this. And so race is going to be overemphasized in your mind. But also, if you're being told that it's not your fault, like anything that you're struggling with, you, of course you're struggling. It's been set up against you. The game is stacked up against you. I mean, you see that with the sort of some of the conspiracy narratives too, that don't have anything to do
Right.
with race. It's
Right.
very seductive to fall into that way of thinking. And there are some of those narratives that I think have contain more compelling truth or information than others. But um, are how does one resist that kind of narrative when you're being told? It must be very hard. I mean, only really people who are really good at perspective taking, people who are really intelligent, and people who can see other sides.
I think, well, it's funny that you say that because I think the people that I've seen that haven't been that way, that have been minorities, are all faith-based. And a lot of people will
Mm,
say that to have faith is not intelligent, to
mm,
have faith is not critical thinking. But to have faith is to say we're all brothers and sisters. That's how I treat people. Like they're my brothers and my sisters. Now I am a person who puts a wall up, and once you've shown me who you are, if you've shown me that if you've shown
mhm,
me you're a grifter or that you're all about yourself, I
mhm.
really have no interest in you. But which I'm not a saint. Let me put it that way. But I do think that that is how people have overcome it. You learn to love people. And I think that when you love somebody, you have a natural curiosity about them. And I believe that natural curiosity is what they're trying to break down. They're trying to say, you must believe these things about these people. And as one of those papers said, and ask no questions. Cut out the curiosity, cut out the longing to bond and to build relationships.
Yeah, that's really shocking. That's really shocking. How devastating that is.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
and one of the things that strikes me as so dangerous about this whole DEI project is that in terms of priming people with information, when you negate something, you posit that thing. When you say, oh, one of these stereotypes, you don't you don't get enough representation. You don't White
right,
people are holding this over you, or white people do
right,
this. And um it's just these like narratives about being on time or being a hard worker or whatever, that
right,
this is whiteness. When
right.
you're bringing these things up, you're saying we need to change this in some way, but you're also putting out these stereotypes about groups of people.
Right.
And so then that is leading to more people believing these things about these groups of people.
And if you don't have those skills, if you don't have the skill of turning up on time, if you don't have the skill of being able to talk reasonably to another person, you will not keep your job.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, and so it feels like the worst case of true systemic racism that you've ever seen because it's really demoralizing people and it's really pushing them back. It's pushing them back down. That's what I see DEI is doing, is pushing them back down. You make people unpleasant. You make
Mm-hmm.
people constantly focused on their victimhood instead of focused on their mental health and being able to achieve the best possible solutions. Um, you just push them down and push them down and you soak them up into this pile of self-absorption, and they're a resentful person and their outcome doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, again, that is slavery. So, and I'm shaking talking about it because I know it's such a controversial thing, and I feel very passionate about it.
Which part is which part makes you nervous to talk about?
Being told that I hate my race,
Mm.
um, you know, or I mean, to me, it's very factual. that that's the situation. And I do
Mm.
not hate any race, including the Black race, including the biracial people. In fact, I feel more about the injustice that I do believe that they suffer through this fake virtue signaling and
Mhm.
thing that makes people, I don't know if dislike us more. Um, but I think that pity and fear is a really awful thing to think that people think about you.
Mm.
And especially when the solutions are right in front of you. There are there's curriculum that can teach people, that can give people hope and inspire them and show them that so many people have overcome, and we won't touch it because they'll say it's too political, right?
Mhm.
And so there's so many solutions. We know from books by like I want to say popes, but that's not it. Monks, monks that happiness and gratitude
Mhm.
do do so much better for your both your longevity and also your capability of doing other things in your life. But yet we're
Mhm.
telling people to soak up resentment.
I think that's a really difficult one for people to, that's a difficult turn for people to make in their mind, because when you do feel like you've been wronged, it's really hard to get to the place where you can integrate that and be happy despite that. I'm thinking of just in my personal life, like I had a terrible divorce, terrible, just awful. So I there was emotional, physical abuse, and also betrayal over and over, infidelity. So I had this terrible divorce, and I still feel like I am having trouble forgiving. Not because there's that for him, not for him, but for myself.
Yeah,
Why do I still sometimes get angry, even though my life is so much better now than it was before, and I've been freed from something? I struggle. And so this is just a personal, this is my
yeah,
own like way of relating to some of these feelings, is like I still get caught up in this cycle of wanting to be spiteful and angry. It's so hard to flip that switch for yourself. It's so hard to say, this was not okay, what happened, but I need to have forgiveness because that's where I find my ease. And that's how I can move forward with a spirit of happiness and gratitude instead of living in resentment. And so when you've convinced people that things have happened that have been heaps and scores of injustices that have been piled
yes,
on their families, on their line for generations, you have been so oppressed, these people have taken everything from you. Look at them sitting over there having the stuff that you're supposed to have. Look
yeah,
at them having what you don't have, and you deserve.
right.
um to your mindset is in that resentment space. You are set
Yes,
to look over there and envy and resent.
yes.
How do you flip that switch? How do you turn on gratitude?
Two things. One, you have to look at who's telling you that narrative. Who constantly whispers that narrative into your head? These people, it is so frustrating to me because these are oftentimes very wealthy, very quote unquote privileged people themselves that are telling these people, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
impossible for you. Because then you say, oh, you're right. I can't. Let me trust you to give me a better outcome
Mm-hmm.
instead of trusting yourself. The other thing, like I said, I'm not a saint. There is an, I hope I don't get in trouble, but there is an FU button in your head. There is that point where you say, oh, really? You've said I can't accomplish anything. You've done this. You've thrown all these things on me. Watch me.
Mm-hmm.
Watch me. I will achieve. I will have a better life than you ever thought I would have. I had a foster mom who said once when I was going to bed, by the time she's 13, she's going to have two kids and be on welfare for the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm.
I was not promiscuous in any way. I hadn't even kissed someone. I mean, no. And But I heard her say that in my head. I thought, watch me,
Mhm.
watch me.
So
And
you're
that's the
talking
thing.
about the difference between absorbing the negative and using it to channel towards something that you energetically point in a different direction.
You know, people are being taught to be so angry. And when I say these people, I mean students especially. But
Hmm.
all of these people are being taught to be so angry, and they're only using it for their own demise. Use that
Hmm.
anger.
Hmm.
Like turn it around and go, "Oh, you're telling me that I can't be friends with these people, that they why?" When they
Hmm.
tell you don't ask questions, say, "Screw that.
Hmm.
I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to go sit down with the pastiest person I can find, and I'm going to have a conversation with them." I mean, because I want to find the common ground. Choose who you want to be and don't let somebody define that for you.
Hmm.
And when they tell you you're wrong, tell them to stuff it. I'm sorry, but that's that's how I feel about this. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's just nobody has a right to limit you.
Hmm.
And that's what I see happening all the time.
Hmm. That's a really important part of you, isn't it? That overcoming, and that it's almost like you're using it as a backboard to spring off of.
I'm like a little rubber ball. I just the harder I fall, the harder I bounce. So yeah, I I just I mean, people think that I'm loving and I hope that I'm loving, but there is also a an internal fire that is just like, how dare you?
Hmm.
Just how dare you decide how limiting my life needs to be?
Hmm.
And if I can spread that, that's why my back kind of subtitle is the Harriet Project. Because
Uh,
if I can spread this message that you can get out of this situation, whether you are black or whether you are white or anything else, you don't have to be mentally manipulated. And that's what they're doing.
hmm.
And who's doing it? Well, the people who are doing it, I mean, the conspiracy theory, but the people who are doing it, t- um, are Zuckerberg and Gates,
Mm,
and they've
the,
got
yeah.
an agenda. So, yeah,
In the chat, Pierce Taylor says emotions aren't an electrical circuit to be turned on or off. I think that they, of course, I mean, literally, no, they're not. But I think that when you make a decision, sometimes it can feel almost like that. When you, uh, when you gain a new perspective, it can almost feel that that sudden, and that the shift can be that remarkable, almost like a turning on and off. I would describe that. What do you think about that, Kara?
well, I think you can wrap yourself in your emotions and use them to justify taking no action. So, like I said, I don't think I have turned them off. I've just made them work for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, as Bob Woodson said, when people are at their worst, be at your best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's not so much that the emotion is turned off, but the shift in what you're doing with it is something.
yeah,
Um, Andrew Joyner gives us £4. Thank you so much, Andrew. That's really nice. Ash Brown says, is it forgiveness or is it a feeling that an injustice against one has not been righted? Feels like some kind of unfinished business, lack of closure. I think that's I think that's a big part of what keeps resentment going, is that we never in life, it's really rare that we get that kind of closure. We don't really get full closure for things that have been done in the past. It's at some point you have to just leave it there and
yeah,
keep going. And that's if you want to hold on to the negative feelings until you get closure, you'll just be holding on to them forever. A lot of the time, I'll never get closure for things that happen in my marriage, the way that broke up. That what would closure look like, really, with that? It would look like going back and having things be done differently. You need a time machine for that. So you just have to figure out at what point you're going to be able to keep moving forward in a positive direction, I think. What are your thoughts, Carob?
that it's closing a chapter.
Mm,
You leave the toxic behind. I will never have a mother who loves me. It's never going to happen. Um, I can't, I could have said, well, because that's the way I grew up. I never want to be a mother because I might be just like that. But
mm,
instead, I used it as a tool. So I said, well, I know what I don't want to be like, you know? And so we can't pretend that pain isn't part of life. But I don't know how we look in the mirror and feel proud of ourselves if we're only looking backwards and only hanging on to the grievance. And
mhm,
also, you have to put the grievance in perspective. One of the most frustrating things is that kids today are learning, they're being presented history as if it's today. And
mm,
so people will not move on because they go, well, this happened back then. And they don't have any perspective at the steps that have been made to go forward.
mhm, mhm,
So, and I think that's an important part. So we close the chapter, we look back, we take what we can from it, whether that's good or bad, and we learn from it. But we should
mhm,
not project it and let it stop us,
mhm,
let it break us, because that's really what it does, is it breaks people, and then you can't be healthy.
mhm.
So,
Yeah. Chris Freestone says, if I stewed on all the terrible things that happened to me in life, I would be a miserable prick all the time. Happiness is our best revenge.
amen. So it's true. And
Yeah.
sometimes I wonder if that's selfish or if that's amoral, but it's the way that I keep going. So
Happiness being the best revenge.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, I feel like sometimes there can be a point in your resentment in your and I'll speak to my personal experience, but not just in the experience that I described, but in other things in my life. And you, you kind of want to hold on to this anger because what happened wasn't right.
Hmm.
Whatever it wasn't right. But you're not punishing the other person by feeling that. They're not experiencing that. You're the one who's experiencing that. So it's sort of an internal punishment that you're giving to yourself as a proxy for the person who you really want to punish or the thing that you really want to punish. So Andrew Joyner says maybe there's a certain strength in forgiveness. Easier said than done, though.
For sure.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that is for sure. But I think that when you're in a happy place, it's easier to turn around and give grace back to someone. And that's the whole thing. The whole message is that all of this evil of Marxist indoctrination, of DEI, which is the same thing, is that there is no redemption. And living a life, like what's the point of living if there isn't redemption for all of the, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's and sins of our fathers garbage,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I think it comes down to. It comes down to sins of our fathers. Um, people feel like they're justified in hating because of generations of things. And instead of going, I don't know, I look at things and I go, thank you so much, all of you people who marched, all of you people who sat in diners. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
because I never had to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, it's a totally different spin.
well,
That's a different
I
spin.
mean, it's just, I think it's a healthy spin.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't pretend that they didn't go through it, but
Mm-hmm.
there should be gratitude for what they did. Otherwise, we might as well be spitting on their graves.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think one of the difficult things to wrap our minds around as people is that even it's not your fault what happened to you in the past necessarily. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but a lot of things happen that are unfortunate, that aren't our fault, that we didn't ask for, and that were unfair. But then it is your responsibility to figure out how you're going to move forward. And and even if it's not your fault, the way you live with that is your responsibility. That's a
okay.
really painful thing for people to come to terms with sometimes. especially when the thing that has happened has been really devastating.
Well, and especially when it's just constantly poured out.
Mhm.
Like some people will say racism is only kept alive, it's only kept on life support by people who can use it for an agenda. Because most of us, and I would still like to believe this. I don't know if it's true, but I believe that most of us, it's basically a dead issue for.
Yeah, except that they keep beating the dead horse. Well, and I
Yes.
don't want to assume that it's a dead issue for everybody.
Yeah,
I know that it's easy to make assumptions from where
right.
I sit about what the experiences of other people are, but I think that the thing that we should be using all these race discussions to do is to underscore the value of seeing people as individuals and knowing that you can't look at someone and by observing the color of their skin or their physical immutable characteristics, you can't assume that you know anything of substance about that person's life or experiences or characteristics or temperament. You just don't know. And so I feel like it's a massive turn in the wrong direction, that it goes exactly the opposite way that it could have gone. I came out of a childhood of feeling bullied for being white, and having this sense of, I never had guilt, but I did have a chip on my shoulder. You know, I think I might have ended up that way anyway, lots of reasons, but I was pretty combative kid in a lot of ways. So, but I came out of that experience with the sense that I know what it's like to be in the out group, and I have sympathy for that experience. And I recognize, as this racial discussion was ramping up, like I can recognize what it's like to be the underdog in that experience. And so maybe that gives me a pathway to empathy that I can use to benefit my clients or the people that I'll meet in my life. And this narrative around, this is the white identity experience, this is the black identity experience, this is the, you go down the line, it leaves no room for that diversity of individual experience.
And one last thing is that
Mhm.
there's a concept called black joy,
Mm,
and um, I don't see it as leaving any joy because the purpose of this black joy is to say that even in the worst of times, people have been able to find reasons to celebrate. But that's a human experience.
mm,
And so when we rob it and push it into black joy, Latino joy, Asian joy, whatever else, we are stripping it of that true joy of just being a human being.
mm.
And yeah, they're really, really going backwards. They're really going backwards. And I'm hoping that conversations like this will help people to know that there's an alternative, that they're not the only person who's thinking, are people losing their minds?
Yeah. Well, thank you for suggesting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always enjoy talking with you.
You too. You too. You're a gem. So
Well,
have
do you have anything you want to cap it off with, or do you feel like we tied it
um
up in a bow?
no, I think that if anybody's watching and they're interested in having the conversation, they can reach out to me because I would love to talk to as many people as I can about this subject. And again, I'm not coming from a place of hate or resentment. I'm trying to help others understand. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, Carob, and thank you to everyone who joined us in the chat. It's great to see you all. I want to read this last chat. Dan Mortensen says Viktor Frankl wrote about dealing with adversity and finding meaning through perseverance and a pursuit of love. And then Internet TV says, one thing I learned about life, it's temporary, so you might as well enjoy every moment. So those are great sentiments